My name is Andrew. I'm 33 years old, and I've been living in Idaho for the last 3 years. For transparency's sake, I didn't write up this account specifically as a submission for your channel, but after it popped into my recommended feed and I saw you taking submissions, I figured that I'd found the perfect home for the warning I'm about to give you and your viewers. Although I have no doubt that what you're about to read might frighten or disturb you, I can assure you that it's not by design. My only wish is that you and your subscribers take heed to what I'm about to say. You see, I think there's someone living off the grid up here in the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest, and I know for a fact that this person is very, very dangerous. Part of the reason I moved up to Boise from my native California, aside from all the financial reasons, is that there's a total of 10 national forests within driving distance of the city. I was a Boy Scout growing up. My dad and uncles used to take my cousins and me during summer vacations, and I found a group of fellow college students to hike with when I was at UC Irvine. So when it came time to choosing a place to start a new life, Boise climbed my wish list pretty damn quickly once I realized that it combined urban amenities, a low cost of living, and the kind of natural beauty that made Southern California feel more like Manhattan than Malibu. During that first year in Idaho, I spent a lot of time hiking Boise National Forest, and the Snake River Conservation Area is right on our doorstep, too. But then as time went by, I started to travel a little further afield with each trip, just to get a feel for all the different forests in the region. I drove over to Sawtooth one time, went up to Payette for a weekend, then went as far as Bitterroot Salmon Chalet, and then eventually Beaverhead Deer Lodge. I made multiple trips to each of the previously mentioned parks. I mean, you don't truly get to know a place after just 1 or 2 hikes, but I only ever made 1 trip to Beaverhead, and if I ever do get over my fear of the place, you can bet your ass I'm staying the hell away from the hills between Maverick and Stewart Mountains. And if you value your life, so should you. Now, in the southern portion of Beaverhead Forest lies the valley between Maverick and Stewart Mountains. At its westernmost point, where 2 creeks meet, the valley is open and treeless. But then travel further east, and the trails taper off into what I can only describe as a capillary system of narrow trails. It kind of reminded me of one of those old hedge mazes, like the kind from The Shining, just on a much bigger scale. All the trails look pretty much identical, with wide open grass trails and pine-covered hills obscuring your view on either side. You can't really get lost these days, not if you're armed with the correct skills and equipment, but if there was ever a place I felt slightly disoriented by the lay of the land, it was there. You'd make a couple of turns, think that you were back on the main strip again, and then boom, the trail would narrow off and you'd find yourself at a dead end. I guess to a less experienced hiker, that might have been a cause for concern, but for me, it was almost nostalgic. I hadn't been even close to lost for coming up on 15 years by that point, so for me there was something almost thrilling about it. It's been years since I felt that same sense of adventure while out on a hike. I also enjoyed them, but I'd long since lost that sense of childlike awe and wonder. So to have it back, that was really something. I kept on exploring for about an hour or so, just wandering up and down the trails to try and familiarize myself with that part of the valley. Then, as I was moseying down this one particular stretch of trail, I began to smell something that smelled a lot like campfire smoke. For quite a while now, I've been in the habit of introducing myself to any fellow hikers and campers I might run into. Some might call that intrusive or even bothersome, but to me, those are big city ideas. I understand where my critics are coming from, but at the risk of sounding melodramatic, the woods aren't the kind of place that you want to go unnoticed. Part of it's just being friendly, shooting the breeze with some kindly strangers, but there's a practical side of it too. I do a lot of solo hiking, and as much as I take all the necessary precautions, I'm still much more vulnerable than most. I like folks knowing I'm there, and I like knowing just a little about who I'm sharing a trail or park with. That way, if I detect even the slightest of bad vibes, I can make myself scarce before trouble so much as toots in the wind. And so, I smell the campfire smoke, and I suspect it's coming from up the hill to my right. I wander up the slope a little, and then, lo and behold, the smell of smoke gets more and more intense the further I walk. And so off I went, following the smell like some human bloodhound until eventually the pines thinned out and I reached a kind of treeless shelf on the hillside. It was almost completely hidden from view, and just as I was thinking, this is flat enough to build on, I realized someone already had. About 50 yards away, someone had built what looked like a small 2-room cabin, complete with the beginnings of a little vegetable garden out front and a short weave fence marking the property's boundary. My first thought upon looking at it was, this can't be legal, because as much as many national parks and forests might encourage overnight campers, any kind of permanent dwelling is strictly prohibited. But at the same time, this person's dwelling was an impressive piece of work, and it obviously wasn't constructed overnight. In which case, how had he managed to stay up there for so long without getting himself into trouble with the Forest Service? All this is going through my head, and I'm just sort of staring at the little cabin in amazement, when, all of a sudden, the cabin's front door swings open, and out steps a bald guy of around 40 to 50 years of age, wearing a dirty wife-beater and a pair of blue jeans. Now, his cabin had a pair of windows complete with what looked to be hinged shutters, but he hadn't looked out of them before exiting his home, so the moment he sees me, I see the startled look come over his face, and he does not look pleased to see me. I figured I'd obviously gave him a bit of a jump scare, so first thing I think to do is raise a hand and wave, just to let him know that I didn't have any ill intentions. He doesn't return the wave. He just walks back into his little cabin, then emerges seconds later, armed with what appeared to be a bolt-action hunting rifle. I just want to make it clear that I did not step into this man's property, and the word property is quite purposely in quotation marks I'm writing here now. Neither was I bearing any kind of weapon or trekking pole with me when he saw me. All the guy saw was a 4-eyed, overweight dork with a floppy hat and a patchy beard, and his first move was to go grab his rifle. The second I saw it, I turned on the spot and started walking back down the hill towards the tree line. And then as I walked, I shouted back, "All right, mister, I get the message. I'm leaving." Hindsight is always 20/20, I guess, and I guess I should have just ran as fast as I could. But in the moment, I figured running would be the loudest way to announce my guilt. Run off through the trees, and he'd think that I was up to no good, maybe fire off a shot at me, and that'd be all she wrote. But if I walked, hands in the air, not going for my own weapon and just trying to de-escalate, then maybe everything would just be fine. I was armed by the time, by the way. Nothing too big, just a handgun in case of bears and whatnot. But then the last thing I wanted to do was potentially start a gunfight in the middle of the woods. If I pulled out my weapon, that constituted a serious escalation, and the more this guy believed that he was in control, the less likely he was probably to shoot me. Or rather, that's what I mistakenly believed at the time. I remember giving it a second round of, "I'm going okay, I don't want any trouble." And in reply, all I heard was, "You stay right where you are." Have you seen those new Dune movies? There's a thing in it, something they call the voice. It's like a magical power. You speak and people will obey whether they want to or not. And I'm telling you, it was like that guy had the voice. He spoke and suddenly my feet were in cement blocks. I wanted to keep walking. Hell, I just wanted to run the second I saw his rifle. But whatever kept him feeling in control and his fingers off the trigger felt like my best course of action in the moment. I also literally cannot overemphasize how little I wanted to shoot this guy and turn a relaxing afternoon's hike into one of the single darkest chapters of my entire life. So, he tells me to stop, but I obviously want to face the guy as I'm talking to him, so I start to turn around. Big mistake. The guy raises his rifle, works the bolt of force around into the chamber, and then points it at me so aggressively that I could practically feel it. He was ready to fire by that point, like my life was in serious danger, but all that was going through my head as I had my arms way up in the air was like, Please don't pee your pants. Please don't pee your pants. I didn't. And before you all go thinking, haha, what a baby, I cannot overstate how fast your mind works in those sort of situations. I was so scared I felt like I could taste the air. My arms and legs felt like they were encased in concrete, and I was sweating in places I didn't know that you could sweat from. So having all those irrational thoughts like that, not running when I had the chance, it all seems like part and parcel of all that raw, primal fear that I was feeling in the moment. Like I said, I started turning to face him, but he racked his rifle and then started yelling things like, "Did I tell you to move? Did I? Move another muscle and watch what happens." All I could think to say was all the same stuff I repeated already, stuff about me wanting to leave, about how I just stumbled across his place and was nothing more than just curious. He looked me up and down for a second, then asked me if I was from the government. I told him no, that I was just a hiker, and in an attempt to reinforce that I wasn't some kind of fed, I told him I worked for a financial firm back in Boise, which was the truth. I told him the name of the place, my position, and then added that he could call them right then and there if he didn't believe me because the office was open on weekends. I only told him all that because he quite clearly had a problem with cops or rangers and probably just about anyone in a position of authority. That, and once I got talking, I found it unusually difficult to stop. I was still talking when he told me to shut up, and then after a few seconds of what looked like thinking, he asked me a question that had me once again questioning whether I was about to pee my pants or not. The guy lowered his rifle just a little, which was kind of reassuring, but not by much, and then he asked me, "Do you believe in God?" Make no mistake, I am not prejudiced against religious types. I had a very Baptist grandmother who volunteered with the church until just months before she passed, and she was just about as saintly of a person as it's possible to meet. Any other context, that question would have provoked anything except an honest answer. But in light of the rifle I had pointed at my stomach, I presume, it gave the question a hell of a lot of weight. On another day, I might have just spoken my mind and told him I consider myself something of an agnostic. I feel like there's something going on in terms of creation and evolution, whatever you want to call it. I just don't think we can so easily put a label like God on it and imagine him up there as this big old friendly white guy with a beard of clouds and sunny demeanor. But then, having considered my position, I decided honesty almost certainly wasn't the best policy. So instead of the truth, I lied and I told him, "Sure, I believe in God." I thought that might have gotten me out of the woods, purely metaphorically, of course, but then he asked me, "Which God?" My gut told me that saying anything apart from Protestant Christian would have probably been bad news for me, and so I went with my instinct and told him that I was Baptist, just like my grandma. When I saw him give me this little nod of approval, I felt so relieved that my knees almost buckled. But unfortunately, the guy wasn't through with me just yet. Starting and stopping as he tried to find the right words, he began to explain how only 2 people in the world knew that he was up there, and he couldn't tolerate a third. I think he must have seen the terror in my face because he went on to explain that he didn't actually want to shoot me. I guess he intended that to be reassuring, but somehow it was not, and that's the point where things turned back to why he'd asked me if I believed in God. He needed to know that I believed in something, so he could make me swear on my life that I wouldn't tell anyone I'd seen him. Right away, I told him, "I swear to God I won't tell anyone I saw you." And I did it so promptly because I very naively believed that he might actually let me walk away. But just the words alone weren't good enough for him. Holding the rifle at his hip now, the guy points it at me just a little more directly, and then tells me to get on my knees. All I remember is saying, "Please," but all that did was make him raise the gun all the way up so he could aim down the sights at me. He then repeated himself and told me to get on my knees, and from that moment, I was convinced that I was going to die, and I'm honestly not sure if I dropped to my knees deliberately or simply because they just gave out altogether. I thought that any second I'd simply go from being wide awake and terrified to just darkness. He'd blow my brains out with a single shot of that rifle and it'd switch me off like a light, you know? I literally remember thinking to myself, at least it'll be quick. But then instead of pulling the trigger, he spoke again. The guy told me to swear again, to God I mean, that I'd never tell another living soul that I'd seen him, or where he was living, or what we talked about. So I did. I put my hands together like I was praying, but I didn't dare close my eyes. Then I swore out loud that never in a million years would I ever tell another of God's creations about anything that had occurred that day. I don't think I said it quite like that, but you get the idea. When I was done, he just said, "Again, louder." And I did what I was told. Then once I was finished, he starts yelling something like, "Swear on your family. Tell him to strike you down dead if you breathe a word to anybody." I wasn't in a position to refuse him, and as much as I probably could have lunged for his rifle or something, I'm also not an idiot, so I didn't even consider that an option at the time. Instead, I just tried my best to ensure that he kept that sense of control because the moment he lost it, the chances of me getting switched off increased exponentially. I swore on my whole extended family that I'd never, ever speak of our encounter for as long as I lived. I told him, and God, and anything else listening for that matter, that I would happily bury my loved ones if I broke my record and bond. And not just that, but I'd happily follow them to hell afterwards if I ever breathed a word of our encounter. I said just about anything and everything that came to mind, but once I really thought about my mom and dad and how devastated they'd be to hear about my body being found up there in that hill, that's when I felt myself starting to well up. I guess that's what really satisfied him in the end, seeing me get sort of emotional like that, not just scared, but sad or broken. Only then did he lower the rifle, and only then did he let me find my feet, and only then was I allowed to walk back down the hillside towards the trail. He yelled a reminder through the trees after me, reminding me of my promises, and so naturally, the first thing I did once I got some real cell phone signal was to report the entire goddamn thing in excruciating detail to the Beaverhead County Sheriff. Like I said, I'm not religious in the traditional sense, and even if I was, I wouldn't have let that guy manipulate my faith in such a way. This also isn't some made-up story where I'm going to keep the guy's secret, or one in which I'm so scared that he'll come after me that I remain silent. I'm willing to admit that I was terrified at the time. I was shaking like a leaf as I walked down that hill, but by the time I got back to my car, I was just about angrier than I'd ever been in my entire life. The mood I was in when I was pacing back and forth calling 911, I could have ended that mother effer 3 times over. But again, that would not have been the right play to make. The grown-up responsible thing to do would be to let the law enforcement handle it, and that's what I tried to do. The only trouble was, after about a week of haranguing the sheriff into dealing with our potential fugitive, I realized that nothing was being done regarding my complaint. First off, piles of red tape meant that the sheriff was forced to inform Beaverhead's contingent of forest rangers of the situation, who in turn took the task off his hands after ensuring him they'd be in touch regarding their search of the area. The day before I called the sheriff for a 3rd time, the rangers had informed him that they'd been unable to locate any such cabin in the valley beneath Maverick Mountain. Naturally, I told the sheriff that was impossible, since I'd seen the cabin and its occupants with my own 2 eyes. I then went to the effort of providing him with, at least what I believe, are the exact coordinates denoting the cabin's location. 45 degrees, 28 minutes, 30.9 seconds north, and 113 degrees, 12 minutes, 41.1 seconds west. After that, the rangers promised to send out a second search party, and although this one actually found the guy's cabin, the man himself was nowhere to be found, and the structure appeared to have been unoccupied for quite some time. I was furious, to say the least. I have a lot of respect for people that choose to serve this country, no matter what form that service may take. But the ineptitude of the part of the authorities in allowing a dangerous fugitive to slip through their fingers is as staggering as it is frightening to me. I don't know for certain who I encountered up in Beaverhead that day, but I'd think that 90% of you would agree that the man was most probably some kind of criminal, and that in all likelihood he was using that cabin and valley as cover to hide from law enforcement. That, or he was just kind of a psychopathic doomsday prepper who took pleasure in terrorizing just some kindly stranger. And either way, the idea of a second encounter filled me with a dread so intense, I'm not sure that I could put it into words. And that's why I haven't been back to Beaverhead since, and that if I did happen to visit those parts in the future, I'd stay the hell away from Maverick Mountain. Regardless of that sadistic old prick's motives, I guess he figured that I wasn't going to be true to my word because, as I said, when the Rangers finally did make it out to his cabin, the man who almost shot me was long gone. But that, in turn, takes me all the way back to the beginning of this email, when I said it wasn't so much a campfire story, but rather a grave warning to anyone planning on hiking in southwestern Montana, north of Idaho. I think that guy is just still out there, living off the grid. In fact, I'm certain of it. My only concern is that the next person who stumbles across him won't be as fortunate as I was. And rather than just being asked, "Do you believe in God?" I'm scared they'll be sent to meet him. I've been going on long-distance hikes in one form or another for just about as long as I can remember. My dad was an army vet, and his brother was always crazy into bow hunting, so most summers, myself, my father, my uncle, and my cousins would all head out into the woods south of Abbeville, South Carolina for a few days of hiking and camping. After he passed, I found that trips into the forest helped me feel closer to him, even if it was just a few hours of hiking on a Sunday afternoon.
really nice. I think so. Yeah. You want to watch movie, right? Same one?
Yeah.
Good.